In the small, struggling town of Brooksville, 13-year-old Tyler feels invisible, trapped in a quiet life shaped by the loss of his mother and his father's distant grief. But one stormy night, everything changes when he finds a helpless puppy abandoned in an alley. Driven by compassion, Tyler takes the pup home, setting off a chain of events that will test his courage, push him to confront his fears, and force him to make choices that challenge his sense of what's right. As Tyler fights to protect the puppy first from his father's resistance, then from the uncertainty of finding it a permanent home, he begins to grow in ways he never expected. Along the way, he must navigate school bullies, his father's reluctance to open up, and his own self-doubt. With the support of a kind-hearted vet and the community's surprising kindness, Tyler discovers that his small acts of bravery have the power to ripple outward, changing lives including his own. But the path isn't easy, and Tyler must learn to balance holding on and letting go. Will his efforts to save one puppy give him the strength to rebuild the broken bonds in his own life? And can one act of kindness spark a wave of change in a town that seems stuck in its struggles? The rain was relentless, a steady drizzle that painted the streets of Brooksville in shimmering grays. It was late October, and the chill in the air seemed to seep through Tyler Morgan's thin hoodie as he trudged down the cracked sidewalk. His breath puffed in little clouds, visible under the dim glow of flickering streetlights. The hum of distant traffic and the occasional splash of passing cars punctuated the otherwise quiet evening. Brooksville was a small town that didn't offer much for a 13-year-old boy like Tyler. It was a patchwork of aging storefronts and narrow alleys. Its charm faded like the peeling paint on the hardware store he passed every day on his walk home from school. For Tyler, the town had become a reflection of his life, worn and subdued, with little promise of change. Tyler shifted his frayed backpack higher on his shoulder, its weight a reminder of the homework he wouldn't get to tonight. His dad, Noah, would expect him to help around the house first, fixing whatever the old, creaky home needed that day. The two of them had been scraping by since Tyler's mom passed away last year, a loss that left more than just a hole in their family. It had drained the light from their lives, especially Noah's. Tyler often felt like he was walking through a fog, his father distant, his days a repetitive cycle of chores and school. But today felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the rain, soaking through his sneakers and chilling his toes. Or maybe it was the gnawing thought that his dad had been angrier than normal that morning. The bills were piling up, and the worn-out roof leaked more with every storm. Tyler sighed, his breath shaky. He didn't blame his dad. He knew life had been cruel to them both. But he couldn't help wishing for something different, something better. As he turned onto a quieter street, he instinctively chose the alley that cut through the block. It wasn't the nicest route, but it shaved 5 minutes off his walk and offered a bit of privacy from the occasional stares of townsfolk who always seemed to pity him. Tyler pulled his hoodie tighter against the rain and stepped into the narrow passage. The air in the alley was colder, the shadows deeper. Water dripped from rusted fire escapes and pooled near the edges of the cracked pavement. Tyler was used to the sight of overflowing trash bins and damp cardboard boxes. He quickened his pace, eager to get home, when something stopped him in his tracks. At first, he thought it was just the sound of rain hitting metal, but there it was again, a faint, high-pitched whimper. Tyler froze, his heart quickening. He scanned the dim alley, his eyes darting between the shadows and piles of refuse. "Hello," he called, his voice unsteady. He felt ridiculous talking into the empty space, but something about the sound tugged at him. It was soft, almost like crying. The whimper came again, clearer this time, from behind a stack of soggy boxes. Tyler hesitated. His dad's words echoed in his mind. "Keep your head down. Don't go looking for trouble." But his feet moved forward despite the warning, his curiosity pulling him closer. He crouched down and carefully moved one of the boxes aside. Nestled against the damp wall was a tiny puppy, its fur soaked and matted, its body trembling violently in the cold. Tyler gasped, his heart squeezing at the sight. The puppy looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Tyler's first instinct was to step back, to leave. What could he do? His father would never let him bring a dog home, and they could barely afford to take care of themselves, let alone a stray. But the longer he stood there, the harder it was to ignore the pitiful way the puppy whimpered, the way it shivered against the cold stone wall. His hands hovered over the small creature. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he murmured, his voice soft. The puppy didn't answer, of course. It only stared at him, its tiny body curling tighter as another gust of wind swept through the alley. Tyler swallowed hard, his mind racing. Leaving it here felt wrong, but bringing it home felt impossible. He glanced back toward the street, as if hoping someone else might appear, someone who could take the puppy and spare him the decision. But the alley was empty, save for the rain and the dog. "I can't just leave you," Tyler muttered, more to himself than to the puppy. The words carried a weight that settled deep in his chest. Ignoring his trembling hands, he took off his hoodie, shivering as the cold air bit at his arms. Gently, he wrapped the puppy in the soft fabric, cradling it against his chest. The puppy barely moved, its weak body limp in his arms. Tyler stood and glanced toward the streetlights in the distance. He had no plan, no idea what he was going to do. But he knew he couldn't walk away. Tyler's home wasn't far, a modest, weathered house at the end of a quiet street. The windows were dark when he approached, and he let out a shaky breath. His dad wasn't home yet, which gave him time to think. He slipped through the door and carefully set the puppy down on an old towel in the kitchen. The warmth of the house seemed to revive it slightly, and it let out a small, hesitant bark. Tyler knelt down, brushing a hand lightly over the damp fur. "You're tougher than you look," he whispered with a faint smile. He found a bowl and filled it with water, placing it near the puppy. It drank weakly, and Tyler felt a flicker of relief. But the relief was short-lived as reality set in. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't keep it, not with his dad's strict rules and their financial struggles. But the thought of handing it over to a shelter, where it might not survive, made his stomach twist. A loud creak at the front door snapped Tyler out of his thoughts. His father's voice called out, rough from the chill outside. "Tyler? You home?" Panic surged through him. He grabbed the towel and scooped up the puppy, tucking it out of sight in his bedroom, just as his dad entered the kitchen. Noah Morgan was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face carried the weariness of someone who had lost too much. His eyes scanned the room, narrowing slightly. "You're soaking wet," Noah said, his tone more matter-of-fact than concerned. "Where's your hoodie?" Tyler shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "It got wet. I'll grab another one." Noah grunted, not pressing further, and opened the fridge. Tyler breathed a small sigh of relief and retreated to his room, where the puppy lay curled on the towel, watching him with curious eyes. Tyler sat on the floor beside it, resting his chin on his knees. "You're going to get me into trouble. You know that?" he whispered. But as the puppy gave a tiny wag of its tail, Tyler felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of warmth, of hope. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he had something to hold on to, something worth fighting for. The next morning, Tyler woke up to the sound of soft whimpering coming from the corner of his room. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But when he turned, he saw the puppy curled up on the towel, its big, round eyes staring up at him. It let out a tiny, tentative bark, and Tyler couldn't help but smile. "Hey there," he said softly, sitting up and crossing the small room to kneel beside it. "You're still here, huh?" The puppy wagged its tail weakly, the small movement enough to send a pang of worry through Tyler's chest. It was so small, so fragile. He could still feel the chill of its fur from the night before, though it was drier now. Tyler reached out, letting the puppy nuzzle his hand. The moment of peace was interrupted by the sound of his dad moving around in the kitchen. Tyler's heart sank. It was only a matter of time before Noah found out, and Tyler had no idea how his father would react. He hadn't exactly been open to change since Tyler's mom passed, and he definitely wouldn't want a dog in the house, not with their financial struggles. Tyler quickly tucked the towel around the puppy and placed it under his bed. "Stay quiet, okay?" he whispered, hoping the puppy understood. It gave a small whimper, but didn't bark. Tyler stepped into the kitchen, trying to act normal. Noah was pouring himself a cup of coffee, his hair still mussed from sleep. The air in the room felt heavy, the silence between them thicker than usual. "Morning," Tyler said, grabbing a piece of bread to toast. Noah glanced at him briefly. "Morning. You sleep okay?" Tyler shrugged. "Yeah. You?" Noah grunted in response, his usual way of avoiding deeper conversations. He sipped his coffee, his gaze drifting to the rain still falling outside the window. "Going to be another wet day," he muttered. Tyler nodded, his mind racing. He had to find a way to explain the puppy without making his dad angry. But before he could figure out how, Noah's eyes narrowed. "What's that smell?" he asked, setting his coffee down. Tyler froze. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he could smell it too, the faint, musty scent of wet fur. He cursed himself silently for not cleaning up better last night. "I don't know," Tyler said quickly, avoiding his dad's eyes. "Maybe something outside." Noah didn't look convinced. He stepped closer, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. "That's not outside." "What are you hiding, Tyler?" "I'm not hiding anything," Tyler said, his voice a little too high-pitched to be believable. Noah's expression darkened, and he pushed past Tyler, heading toward his room. Tyler darted after him, panic rising in his chest. "Wait, Dad, it's not what you think." Noah threw open the door and stopped in his tracks. The puppy had crawled out from under the bed, its head tilted innocently as it looked up at him. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the sound of rain tapping against the window. Noah turned to Tyler, his jaw tight. "What is this?" Tyler swallowed hard. I found it in the alley last night. It was freezing, Dad. I couldn't just leave it there." "You found it?" Noah's voice was sharp, filled with disbelief. "And you thought it was a good idea to bring it here? We can't even take care of ourselves, Tyler, let alone a dog." "I know," Tyler said quickly, his voice shaking. "But it was going to die out there. I couldn't just walk away." Noah stared at him for a long moment, his face a mix of anger and something else, something softer, but fleeting. Then he shook his head and stepped back. "You can't keep it. We'll take it to the shelter after breakfast." "No." The word burst out of Tyler before he could stop it. His dad looked at him, startled by the outburst. "We can't take it to the shelter," Tyler said, his voice trembling but determined. "They might not take care of it. It's just a puppy, Dad. It didn't do anything wrong." Noah rubbed a hand over his face, his frustration palpable. "Tyler, we can't afford this. I'm sorry, but it's not an option." Tyler felt his chest tighten, the weight of helplessness pressing down on him. He wanted to argue, to beg, but he knew his dad was right in some ways. They didn't have the money for vet bills or dog food. But the thought of leaving the puppy at a shelter, alone and scared, made his stomach churn. "Can we at least take it to someone who can help?" Tyler asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Not a shelter, maybe the vet? Just to see if it's okay." Noah hesitated, his stern expression faltering slightly. He let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, but we're not keeping it, Tyler. I mean it." Tyler nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Dad." An hour later, Tyler and Noah arrived at the small veterinary clinic on the edge of town. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and Tyler held the puppy close, shielding it from the cold. The clinic sign was old and faded, but the inside was warm and welcoming, with a faint smell of antiseptic in the air. The woman at the front desk greeted them with a kind smile. She was in her 40s, with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag read Sarah Carter. "How can I help you?" she asked, glancing at the bundle in Tyler's arms. I found this puppy last night," Tyler said, his voice hesitant. "It was in pretty bad shape. I just wanted to make sure it's okay." Sarah's smile softened, and she gestured for them to follow her. "Let's take a look." In the exam room, Sarah carefully unwrapped the puppy and examined it, her movements gentle but efficient. Tyler watched nervously as she checked its paws, teeth, and ears. "It's malnourished and a little dehydrated," Sarah said finally, her tone reassuring. "But overall, it's not in terrible shape. With some care, it should recover just fine." Tyler let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's good, right?" "It's very good," Sarah said with a smile. She glanced at Noah, who stood stiffly in the corner, his arms crossed. "I can keep the puppy here for now, if that helps. We'll get it cleaned up and fed. You can decide what to do from there." Tyler's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd do that?" "Of course," Sarah said. "You did a good thing bringing it here. Not everyone would have cared enough to do that." Noah shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. That's appreciated. Sarah gave Tyler an encouraging look. We'll take good care of it. You can check in anytime. As they left the clinic, Tyler felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a lingering sadness. He didn't know what the future held for the puppy, but for now, it was safe. And that was enough. Tyler couldn't keep still. His knee bounced anxiously as he sat in the passenger seat of his dad's truck, watching the rain blur the clinic sign in the distance. The puppy, now safe in Sarah's care, had left a void in Tyler's chest. It wasn't just the absence of the little bundle of fur, it was the uncertainty of what would happen next. You did what you could, Noah said, his tone gruff but not unkind as he steered the truck toward home. The vet'll figure it out from here. I know, Tyler muttered, though his voice carried little conviction. He glanced out the window, his mind racing with questions. Would Sarah really be able to take care of the puppy? And what would happen to it after that? He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him was already attached. He had named the puppy Lucky in his head, though he hadn't dared say it aloud. When they pulled into the driveway, Tyler's dad parked and turned off the engine. The house loomed before them, a creaky, weathered structure that seemed to groan under the weight of its years. Tyler climbed out of the truck, rain-soaked gravel crunching under his sneakers. Grab the mail before you head in, Noah called, already halfway to the front door. Tyler trudged to the rusty mailbox, flipping through the usual stack of bills and flyers before noticing a handwritten note tucked between the envelopes. The handwriting was neat and unfamiliar. Tyler, come by the clinic after school tomorrow. I think we need to talk about Lucky. Sarah. Tyler's heart leapt. She had called him Lucky too. He tucked the note into his pocket, the edges damp from the rain, and hurried inside. The next day at school, Tyler could barely concentrate. Math problems blurred together, and history lectures droned in the background like static. His classmates carried on as usual, laughing and whispering in groups that Tyler was never a part of. He had learned long ago to keep to himself. It was easier that way. When the final bell rang, Tyler didn't waste a second. He stuffed his books into his backpack and bolted out the door, ignoring the drizzle that had returned to blanket Brooksville in its usual gray haze. The walk to Sarah's clinic felt longer than usual, anticipation and nerves twisting in his stomach. When he arrived, the warmth of the clinic enveloped him, the faint hum of machinery and the soft padding of animal paws creating a soothing atmosphere. Sarah was at the front desk, her smile lighting up when she saw him. Right on time, she said, standing to greet him. Come on back. Tyler followed her into one of the exam rooms, his heart pounding. Lucky was lying in a small crate, clean and wrapped in a soft blanket. The puppy's ears perked up at the sound of Tyler's voice. He's doing better already, Sarah said, kneeling beside the crate. He's a tough little guy. Tyler crouched down, letting Lucky sniff his hand before scratching behind the puppy's ears. Lucky let out a happy yip, wagging his tail. Tyler grinned, a weight lifting from his chest. I can't keep him, can I? Tyler asked quietly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. He already knew the answer, but needed to hear it aloud. Sarah hesitated, her expression softening. I know your situation at home is complicated, she said gently. But that doesn't mean Lucky can't have a happy ending. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have an idea. Tyler looked up, his brows furrowed in curiosity. Brooksville's a small town, Sarah continued. People here care when someone steps up to do something good. I think if we told the community about Lucky, about how you found him and brought him here, we might be able to raise enough money to help him. Maybe even cover his vet bills and find him a permanent home. Tyler blinked, surprised. You think people would care? About a stray dog? Sarah smiled. I think people care about stories like this, and about kids who show kindness when it's not easy. Tyler felt his face grow warm at the compliment. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone praised. How would we do it? We'd organize a small fundraiser, Sarah said. Something simple. Maybe a weekend event at the clinic where people can donate, meet Lucky, and learn about animal care. You'd be the star of the story, of course. Tyler hesitated, doubt creeping in. I don't know. I'm not great at talking to people. And what if no one shows up? Then we try something else, Sarah said firmly. But I have a feeling people will show up, and I'll be with you every step of the way. The sincerity in her voice was enough to chip away at Tyler's uncertainty. He nodded slowly, the smallest flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Okay, let's do it. That weekend, the clinic buzzed with activity. Sarah and a few volunteers had decorated the space with colorful signs and banners, one of which read Lucky's Day in bold, cheerful letters. Tyler had spent the morning helping to set up tables with donation jars, brochures, and even a few baked goods that one of the volunteers had brought. By the time the event started, a small crowd had already gathered. Tyler stood nervously near Lucky's crate, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're doing great," she said. "Just tell people what you told me about finding Lucky. They'll want to hear it." Tyler nodded, though his throat felt dry. When the first family approached, a mom and her 2 young kids, he managed a small smile. The kids crouched down to pet Lucky, their faces lighting up as the puppy licked their hands. "Did you really find him in the rain?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide. "Yeah," Tyler said, his voice gaining confidence. "He was all alone in this alley. I couldn't just leave him there." The mom smiled warmly. "That was a brave thing to do. You got a good heart, kid." As the day went on, more people came, and Tyler found himself growing more comfortable sharing Lucky's story. Donations trickled in steadily, and by the end of the afternoon, the jars were nearly full. Sarah beamed as she counted the money, her pride in Tyler evident. "You did it," she said, handing Tyler a folded piece of paper. "This is what we've raised so far. It's enough to cover Lucky's vet bills, and then some." Tyler stared at the paper, disbelief washing over him. "Really? That's amazing. You made this happen," Sarah said. "This is what happens when people work together." As Tyler looked around the clinic, watching the families laughing and kids playing with Lucky, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: belonging. For the first time, he realized that maybe he wasn't as invisible as he'd thought. That night, Tyler sat on the edge of his bed, the events of the day replaying in his mind. Lucky lay curled up beside him, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Tyler reached out, brushing his fingers through the puppy's soft fur. "Looks like you're pretty popular now," he whispered with a small smile. "You deserve it." The thought of saying goodbye to Lucky still weighed on him, but for now, he let himself savor the moment. He had done something good, something that mattered, and that was enough. As he drifted off to sleep, Tyler's dreams were filled with hope for Lucky, for himself, and for the small, unexpected ways kindness could change everything. Tyler woke early the next morning, sunlight streaming through the cracks in his window blinds. For once, the rain had stopped, and Brooksville was wrapped in the quiet stillness that only came after a storm. He lay in bed for a moment, watching Lucky as the puppy stretched and rolled over in his sleep. The fundraiser had been a success more than he could have hoped for, but it was the lingering feeling of connection that stayed with him. For years, Tyler had felt like an outsider, invisible to the world around him. Yesterday had been different. People had listened to him, encouraged him, even thanked him. He felt, for the first time in a long time, that he wasn't entirely alone. Lucky stirred, his small paws paddling the air as he yawned. Tyler chuckled, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "Time to get up, little guy," he said. "Sarah's probably wondering how you're doing." The walk to the clinic felt lighter than usual. Tyler carried Lucky in a small box lined with a blanket, careful to shield him from the crisp autumn air. The streets of Brooksville were quieter on Sunday mornings, the shops closed, and the sidewalks empty. Tyler didn't mind. It gave him time to think. When he reached the clinic, Sarah greeted him with her usual warm smile. "There's our hero," she teased, holding the door open. Tyler grinned, his cheeks flushing. "Lucky's the real star, not me." Sarah laughed as she led them inside. "Well, you both did a good job yesterday. Come on back, we'll do a quick checkup." Tyler followed her into the exam room, where Sarah gently lifted Lucky from the box. The puppy wriggled happily, his tail wagging as Sarah placed him on the table. "He's already looking better," Sarah said, her voice cheerful as she checked Lucky's weight and temperature. "His appetite's good, and his energy is definitely up. You've been taking great care of him." Tyler felt a swell of pride at her words. "He's been pretty easy to look after," he said, scratching Lucky's chin. "I think he likes the attention." Sarah chuckled. "Well, he's certainly getting plenty of that. But we do need to talk about what comes next." The words made Tyler's heart sink. He had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was only a matter of time before Lucky's future would have to be decided. "What do you mean?" Tyler asked hesitantly. Sarah's expression softened. "I know how much you care about him, Tyler, but we have to start looking for a permanent home, a place where he can grow up safe and happy." Tyler nodded, though the thought of letting Lucky go made his chest ache. "Yeah, I get it," he said quietly. "It's just he's been through so much already. I want to make sure he ends up with someone who really cares." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll make sure of that. I've already had a few families ask about him after the fundraiser. People are excited to give him a home." Tyler forced a small smile, though his heart felt heavy. He wanted to be happy for Lucky, but the thought of saying goodbye left him feeling hollow. Over the next week, Tyler visited the clinic every day after school. Lucky continued to grow stronger, his playful personality shining through more with each passing day. He had a habit of chewing on Tyler's shoelaces, barking triumphantly whenever he succeeded in untying them. Tyler couldn't help but laugh, even as he tried to keep the puppy from making too much of a mess. One afternoon, Sarah sat down with Tyler after his usual visit. She had a folder in her hands, her expression a mix of excitement and seriousness. "I wanted to share some updates about Lucky," she said, opening the folder. Inside were photos of families who had expressed interest in adopting him, along with notes about their homes and lifestyles. Tyler leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Sarah showed him the profiles one by one, describing each family in detail. There was a couple with a large backyard, a retired teacher who lived near the park, and a family with 2 kids who had been asking for a dog for years. "They all seem nice," Tyler said, though his voice was tinged with hesitation. "How do we pick the right one?" "It's not just up to us," Sarah explained. "Each family will go through an adoption process, including interviews and home visits. We'll make sure Lucky ends up somewhere he'll be loved and cared for." Tyler nodded, though the knot in his chest tightened. He knew it was the right thing to do, but that didn't make it any easier. At home, Tyler tried to keep busy, helping his dad with chores and homework. But Lucky was always on his mind. He found himself replaying moments from their time together, the way Lucky wagged his tail when Tyler walked into the room, the way he curled up beside him during quiet evenings. One night, Tyler sat at the kitchen table while his dad washed dishes. The sound of running water filled the silence between them, but Tyler couldn't shake the urge to speak. "Dad," he said finally, his voice hesitant, "do you think we could keep Lucky?" Noah froze, the plate in his hand suspended midair. He sighed deeply, setting it down before turning to face Tyler. "Tyler," he began, his tone measured, "we've talked about this. We can't afford to take care of a dog. It's just not practical." "I know," Tyler said quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "But I've been taking care of him, and the fundraiser covered his vet bills. I could keep helping Sarah at the clinic to pay for food and stuff." Noah frowned, his face lined with worry. "It's not just about money. It's a responsibility. What happens if things get harder for us? You've seen how tight things are already." "I know," Tyler said again, his voice breaking slightly. "But Lucky makes me feel like things could get better. Like I'm not just stuck, you know?" Noah's expression softened at his son's words, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But no promises." Tyler nodded, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. The following Saturday, Sarah called Tyler to the clinic for what she said was an important meeting. When he arrived, she greeted him with a knowing smile. "Lucky's got an adoption interview today," she said. "I thought you might want to be here for it." Tyler's stomach dropped. "Already?" "Don't worry," Sarah said, sensing his unease. "This is just the first step. We'll see how it goes." The family arrived ashore, while later a kind-looking couple with a young girl who immediately lit up at the sight of Lucky. Tyler watched from the corner of the room as they interacted, the little girl giggling as Lucky licked her hand. "He seems happy," Sarah said quietly, standing beside Tyler. "Yeah," Tyler murmured, though his chest ached. "He does." As the visit went on, Tyler couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Lucky deserved a good home, and this family seemed like they could provide it. But the thought of letting him go felt like losing a piece of himself. When the family left, Sarah turned to Tyler. They really liked him, and they're a great match. But nothing's final yet. Tyler nodded, forcing a smile. I just want what's best for him. As he walked home that evening, Tyler realized something. No matter what happened, Lucky had changed his life. He had reminded Tyler of the importance of kindness, of stepping up even when it wasn't easy. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days after Lucky's first adoption interview felt heavier than Tyler had anticipated. Every time he thought about the little girl giggling as Lucky played, a pang of loss hit him. He knew this was what Sarah had been preparing him for. He knew Lucky needed a stable home, one filled with the kind of joy and support Tyler and his dad couldn't quite offer. Still, knowing didn't make the ache in his chest any easier to bear. At school, Tyler found it hard to focus. He carried the same sense of uncertainty he'd felt since the fundraiser, only now it had deepened into something harder to shake. While his teachers droned on about equations and historical figures, Tyler's thoughts stayed locked on Lucky and the potential of saying goodbye. By lunchtime, he was sitting alone at the far end of the cafeteria, picking at a bland sandwich. It was a familiar spot, one he had claimed since the beginning of the school year. Tyler wasn't exactly unpopular, but he wasn't part of any group either. Most of the time, he preferred the quiet. That day, though, it seemed even his quiet corner wasn't safe. "Hey, Morgan," a loud voice called. Tyler didn't have to look up to recognize the mocking tone. It belonged to Chris Barker, a kid who always seemed to thrive on making others uncomfortable. Tyler sighed, his grip tightening on his sandwich as Chris sauntered over, trailed by two of his usual sidekicks. "Heard you've got a new best friend," Chris sneered, plopping down across from Tyler. "A stray dog, right? Guess you needed someone who wouldn't run away from you." The two boys behind Chris snickered, but Tyler kept his eyes on the table. He learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. "Guess it makes sense," Chris continued, leaning closer. "You and a stray dog? Perfect match. Both pathetic." Tyler clenched his fists under the table, heat rising in his cheeks. Part of him wanted to snap back, to tell Chris to leave him alone. But another part, the part that had lived through years of being an easy target, knew it wasn't worth it. "Not going to say anything?" Chris prodded. "Come on, Morgan. Don't tell me the dog's got more backbone than you." Tyler stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he grabbed his lunch tray and walked away, ignoring the laughter that followed him. He dumped the tray in the trash and headed for the library, where the quiet would let him breathe again. After school, Tyler made his way to the clinic, his backpack feeling heavier than usual. Sarah greeted him at the door, her smile warm as always, but Tyler could tell she noticed the slump in his shoulders. "Rough day?" she asked gently. Tyler shrugged. "Just school stuff." Sarah didn't press further. Instead, she led him back to the room where Lucky was waiting. The puppy barked happily when he saw Tyler, bounding forward to lick his hand. Tyler's mood lifted immediately, a smile breaking through his clouded thoughts. "He's getting stronger every day," Sarah said, watching as Tyler played with Lucky. "The family who visited last week is still interested. They're planning another meeting tomorrow." Tyler nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. He didn't want Sarah to see how much the news unsettled him. Instead, he focused on Lucky, scratching behind his ears and letting the puppy's playful energy distract him. But even as Lucky wagged his tail and nuzzled Tyler's hand, the weight of the coming changes loomed over them. That night, Tyler sat in his room, staring at his homework without really seeing it. His dad was in the living room, watching an old movie, the muffled sound of dialogue filtering through the thin walls. The events of the day replayed in Tyler's mind: the taunts from Chris, the uncertainty of Lucky's future, the gnawing sense of powerlessness that seemed to follow him everywhere. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Before he could sink further into his thoughts, there was a soft knock at his door. "Come in," Tyler called. Noah stepped inside, his hands in his pockets. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him seem older than he was. He glanced at Tyler's desk, taking in the untouched homework and the faraway look in his son's eyes. "You okay?" Noah asked, his voice softer than usual. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." Noah sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze thoughtful. It's about the dog, isn't it? Tyler sighed, his shoulders sagging. Yeah, I know I can't keep him. I get that. But it still sucks, you know? Noah nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about that too. Tyler looked up, surprised. You have? Yeah, Noah admitted. He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right words. I know I've been hard on you about this whole thing, and I know things haven't been easy for us since your mom, but seeing you with Lucky, I can tell he means a lot to you. He does, Tyler said quietly. It's not just about him being a dog. He makes things feel, I don't know, less heavy. Noah nodded again, his expression unreadable. I'll tell you what, let's see how things go with the adoption process. If for some reason it doesn't work out, maybe we'll figure something out. I'm not promising anything, but I'll think about it. Tyler's heart lifted, a flicker of hope breaking through the gloom. Really, Noah said. But don't get your hopes up too much. We'll take it one step at a time. Tyler nodded, a small smile forming. Thanks, Dad. Noah stood, giving Tyler's shoulder a light squeeze before leaving the room. As the door closed, Tyler let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The next day, Tyler was back at the clinic for Lucky's second meeting with the potential adopters. The little girl squealed with delight when Lucky bounded into the room, his tail wagging furiously. Tyler watched from the corner, his emotions a mix of pride and sadness. He really loves her, Sarah said quietly, standing beside Tyler. This could be a great home for him. I know, Tyler murmured. That's what makes it so hard. Sarah gave him a sympathetic look. It's okay to feel that way. You've done so much for him already. And no matter what happens, you'll always be a part of his story. Tyler nodded, though his throat felt tight. He stayed for the rest of the meeting, watching as Lucky played with the family and the little girl giggled at his antics. When they left, Sarah reassured Tyler that nothing was final yet, but Tyler could see how well Lucky fit with them. He knew it was the right thing, even if it hurt. That night, Tyler lay in bed, Lucky curled up beside him for what might be one of their last nights together. He stroked the puppy's fur, his thoughts racing. You're gonna be okay, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. No matter where you end up. Lucky stirred, nuzzling Tyler's hand as if to reassure him. Tyler smiled faintly, a tear slipping down his cheek. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he held on to the small moments that made everything worth it. The morning came quicker than Tyler wanted. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, casting warm streaks across the walls, but he barely noticed. Lucky was still curled up on his blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic breaths. Tyler watched him for a moment, his hand resting on the puppy's back. Today might be the day, he whispered. His voice wavered, betraying the storm of emotions he was trying to hold back. Lucky stirred, yawning as his paws stretched out in front of him. The sight brought a fleeting smile to Tyler's face, but it didn't last. In the kitchen, Noah was already at the table, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. Tyler joined him quietly, pouring himself a bowl of cereal. The air between them was unusually light, though neither said much. It was as if both were waiting for the weight of the day to land fully on their shoulders. Finally, Noah broke the silence. You're heading to the clinic this afternoon, right? Tyler nodded, staring down at his cereal. Yeah, the family's coming back. Noah sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You've done a good thing for that dog, Ty. No matter what happens, you should be proud of that. Tyler glanced up, surprised by the rare note of encouragement in his dad's voice. Thanks, he said softly. Noah offered a small, almost hesitant smile. I mean it. You gave him a chance, and not everyone would have done that. The words settled over Tyler like a fragile comfort. He nodded, feeling a flicker of warmth amidst the uncertainty. At the clinic, the air buzzed with activity. Sarah was at the front desk, typing on the computer, but her face lit up when she saw Tyler walk in with Lucky in his arms. There's my favorite duo, she said, setting aside her work. How are you holding up? Tyler gave a half shrug, his lips twitching into a weak smile. I'm okay, I guess. Sarah's expression softened. I know this isn't easy, Tyler, but remember, you've done more for Lucky than most people would have. You've given him a real shot. Tyler nodded, though his throat tightened. He carried Lucky to one of the back rooms, where the little crate the puppy sometimes used was set up. As he placed Lucky inside, the puppy whined softly, his big eyes watching Tyler's every move. "Don't look at me like that," Tyler murmured, stroking Lucky's head. "You're going to be fine, buddy." The sound of a bell jingling at the front door made Tyler's heart lurch. He glanced toward the hallway, knowing who it was. The family, the smiling parents, and their excited little girl had arrived for their final meeting with Sarah. Today could be the day Lucky found his new home. Tyler stood quietly to the side as Sarah introduced the family to Lucky again. The little girl squealed with delight as the puppy wagged his tail furiously, his tiny body bouncing with energy. "He remembers you," Sarah said, laughing as the girl knelt to pet Lucky. "He's so excited to see you again." Tyler watched, his heart twisting. Lucky looked happy, like he belonged with them. It was what Tyler had hoped for, wasn't it? A safe, loving home for Lucky, a place where he could grow up surrounded by warmth and joy. "Do you want to hold him?" Sarah asked the little girl, who nodded eagerly. Tyler stepped forward, carefully lifting Lucky and placing him in her arms. The puppy squirmed happily, licking her face as she giggled. The parents beamed, thanking Sarah and Tyler repeatedly. They asked questions about Lucky's care, what he liked to eat, how he behaved around people. Sarah answered most of them, but Tyler chimed in occasionally, his voice soft but steady. "He loves chasing shoelaces," he said with a faint smile, "and he'll do anything for a little piece of chicken." The parents laughed, and the mom gave Tyler an approving look. "You've done an amazing job with him," she said. "It's clear how much you care." Tyler nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He wanted to say more, but the words didn't come. As the family prepared to leave, Sarah walked them to the front desk to go over the final paperwork. Tyler stayed behind in the exam room, leaning against the wall. The silence felt heavy, pressing against him from all sides. A soft nudge against his leg startled him. He looked down to see Lucky, who had somehow slipped away from the others, his tail wagging as he gazed up at Tyler. "Lucky," Tyler murmured, crouching down. He scooped the puppy into his arms, holding him close. "You're supposed to be with him." For a moment, Tyler just held him, letting the puppy's warmth seep into his chest. His eyes stung, but he blinked back the tears. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "You're going to be so loved." The sound of footsteps made him look up. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her expression soft and understanding. "They're ready to take him home," she said gently. Tyler nodded, his arms tightening around Lucky for one last moment. Then, with a deep breath, he stood and carried him to the front desk. As the family drove away with Lucky, Tyler stood outside the clinic, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The sky was clear for once, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. But inside, Tyler felt a hollow ache. Sarah stepped up beside him, her voice quiet. "It's hard, I know, but you did the right thing." Tyler nodded, though his chest felt tight. "It just feels weird, like I lost something." "You didn't lose him," Sarah said. "You gave him something he wouldn't have had without you. That's a big deal, Tyler." He glanced at her, searching her face for reassurance. "Do you think he'll be happy?" "I know he will," Sarah said firmly, "because you gave him the best possible start." Over the next few days, Tyler threw himself into his routine school, chores, and the occasional visit to the clinic to help Sarah. The house felt quieter without Lucky, but Tyler tried not to dwell on it. He told himself it was enough to know that Lucky was safe, that he was happy. Still, the ache lingered, a quiet reminder of the bond he had formed with the little puppy. One afternoon, while sweeping the clinic's front room, Tyler heard the door jingle. He looked up to see a woman holding a donation box. She introduced herself as one of the fundraiser attendees and handed Sarah an envelope stuffed with cash. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "It's amazing what you're doing for these animals. And that boy who helped with the fundraiser? He's a good kid." Sarah smiled, glancing at Tyler. "He is," she said, "and he's been a huge help." The woman turned to Tyler, her smile warm. "You should be proud of yourself. What you did for that puppy was special." Tyler mumbled a quiet thank you, his cheeks burning. But as the woman left, a small part of him felt lighter. That evening, Tyler sat at the kitchen table with his dad, eating dinner in comfortable silence. Noah set his fork down, clearing his throat. "I heard from Sarah today," he said. Tyler looked up, surprised. "You did?" She said Lucky's doing great with his new family. They sent her some pictures. "Looks like he's settling in." A mix of emotions washed over Tyler: relief, sadness, and a quiet kind of pride. "That's good," he said softly. Noah nodded. "You made that happen, Ty. You gave him a chance." For the first time in days, Tyler felt the ache in his chest ease, replaced by something warmer. He smiled, a genuine one this time, and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I did." The days following Lucky's adoption settled into a kind of uneasy normal for Tyler. He spent his mornings at school and afternoons at the clinic helping Sarah with small tasks. The ache of Lucky's absence still lingered, but it had softened into something more manageable. Knowing Lucky was safe and happy gave Tyler some comfort, even if a part of him still missed the wag of the puppy's tail and the warmth of his small body nestled in his arms. One crisp afternoon, Tyler walked to the clinic with a small box of supplies Sarah had asked him to pick up from the hardware store. The streets of Brooksville were quiet, the leaves on the sidewalk crunching under his sneakers. As he neared the clinic, he noticed a group of kids gathered at the far end of the street. At first, he paid them no mind, but as he got closer, the raised voices caught his attention. He stopped in his tracks when he recognized Chris Barker standing at the center of the group, his usual smirk plastered across his face. Chris was holding something in his hand, a collar, and dangling it tauntingly in front of a scrawny stray dog that cowered near the curb. The sight sent a jolt of anger through Tyler's chest. The dog, a scruffy little mutt with wiry fur, was clearly terrified. It tried to back away, but Chris and the other kids blocked its path, laughing as the dog whimpered. "Come on, you stupid mutt," Chris sneered, shaking the collar. "What's the matter? Too dumb to figure out how this works?" Tyler clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He hated confrontation, especially with someone like Chris, who seemed to thrive on making others feel small. But as he watched the dog tremble, something inside him snapped. "Leave it alone!" Tyler shouted, stepping forward before he could stop himself. The group turned, startled by his sudden outburst. Chris's smirk widened when he saw Tyler. Well, look who it is," the dog whisperer. "Just leave it alone," Tyler repeated, his voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through him. "It's not doing anything to you." Chris laughed, tossing the collar to one of his friends. "What's it to you, Morgan? You gonna take this one home, too?" The other kid snickered, but Tyler didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Chris. "You're not funny. Just let it go." Chris's expression darkened, the amusement fading from his face. He stepped toward Tyler, his tone mocking, but with an edge of hostility. "What are you going to do about it? Huh? You think you're some kind of hero now?" Tyler's chest tightened, but he stood his ground. "I don't have to do anything. Just walk away." For a moment, the two boys stared each other down, the tension thick between them. Tyler's heart raced, but he refused to look away. Finally, Chris scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. "Whatever. This one's not worth it anyway." He turned to the others. "Let's go." The group sauntered off, their laughter fading as they disappeared down the street. Tyler let out a shaky breath, his hands still trembling. He crouched down slowly, his voice softening as he spoke to the dog. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured. "They're gone now." The dog looked up at him with wide, wary eyes. Its fur was patchy, and it was so thin Tyler could see its ribs. He reached out carefully, letting the dog sniff his hand. After a moment of hesitation, it stepped closer, its tail wagging tentatively. Tyler carried the dog the rest of the way to the clinic, cradling it gently despite its bony frame. When he arrived, Sarah looked up from the front desk, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Tyler? What happened?" He set the dog down on a blanket and explained everything: Chris, the group of kids, the way they had cornered the stray. As he spoke, Sarah's face grew stern, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You did the right thing standing up to them," she said once he finished. "But that sounds like it could have gotten dangerous. Are you okay?" Tyler nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just couldn't let them hurt it." Sarah crouched beside the dog, examining it with gentle hands. "This little one's had a rough time, that's for sure. but you brought it to the right place. Tyler watched as Sarah worked, his chest swelling with a mix of pride and relief. He had acted on instinct, but seeing the dog safe and cared for now made it all worth it. Later that evening, Tyler sat in the clinic's break room, sipping a cup of hot cocoa Sarah had made for him. The stray was resting in a crate nearby, its breathing slow and steady. Sarah joined him, her own mug in hand. "You know," she said, her tone light, "you have a knack for finding animals who need help." Tyler smiled faintly. "I guess I just can't ignore it when I see something like that." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a good quality, Tyler. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it's not easy." Tyler stared into his mug, the events of the day replaying in his mind. He hadn't felt brave in the moment, just angry. But hearing Sarah's words made him realize something. Standing up for the stray, even when it meant facing someone like Chris, had shown him a strength he didn't know he had. At home that night, Tyler sat on the edge of his bed, the room quiet except for the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. He thought about Lucky, about the new stray at the clinic, and about the way Sarah had encouraged him. Maybe he wasn't the invisible kid he had always thought himself to be. Maybe he could make a difference, even in small ways. The thought filled him with a sense of possibility he hadn't felt before. As he drifted off to sleep, Tyler made a silent promise to himself. No matter what challenges came his way, he would keep trying. Because sometimes it wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what you could when it mattered most. The morning after rescuing the stray dog, Tyler woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Though the encounter with Chris Barker had left him rattled, the feeling of stepping up and doing the right thing stayed with him. It was a small victory, but one that carried weight. He had made a difference again. Still, a part of him dreaded the day ahead. Word of yesterday's confrontation was bound to spread, and Tyler wasn't looking forward to facing Chris at school. But he pushed the thought aside as he got dressed, focusing instead on the stray he'd left at the clinic. He planned to visit after class and see how it was doing. When he got to school, the hallways buzzed with the usual chatter, lockers slamming and voices overlapping. Tyler kept his head down, hoping to avoid attention. But as he reached his locker, he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Morgan." Tyler turned slowly, his stomach nodding. Chris was leaning against a nearby row of lockers, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. For a moment, Tyler braced himself for another round of mockery, but Chris didn't smirk or laugh. Instead, he walked over, stopping a few feet away. "You've got guts standing up to me like that yesterday," Chris said, his tone almost respectful. Tyler blinked, caught off guard. Thanks, I guess?" Chris shrugged, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "I mean, it was stupid, but I get it. You care about those dumb animals, or whatever." Tyler frowned, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, you do." Chris nodded, his gaze dropping for a moment. "Well, whatever. Just don't expect me to go easy on you next time." With that, Chris turned and walked away, leaving Tyler standing there, dumbfounded. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it wasn't the taunt he had been expecting either. Tyler exhaled, his tension easing slightly as he closed his locker and headed to class. That afternoon, Tyler walked to the clinic, the memory of his strange encounter with Chris still fresh in his mind. When he arrived, Sarah was in the front room, reviewing paperwork. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Hey, Tyler. Just in time. I was about to check on our little friend." Together, they walked to the exam room where the stray dog was resting. The mutt looked much better after a night of care. Its wiry fur was cleaner, and its eyes were brighter. When it saw Tyler, its tail wagged furiously, thumping against the crate. "Looks like someone's happy to see you," Sarah said, grinning. Tyler knelt beside the crate, reaching through the bars to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" The dog barked, a small, enthusiastic sound that made Tyler smile. Sarah crouched beside him, watching the interaction. "I've been thinking about a name for this one," Sarah said. "Any ideas?" Tyler thought for a moment, his hand still on the dog's head. "How about Scout? He seems adventurous." Sarah nodded, her smile widening. "Scout it is." As they worked together to feed Scout and clean his crate, Sarah glanced at Tyler thoughtfully. "You know, you've got a real gift with animals. They trust you. Tyler shrugged, though her words warmed him. I don't like seeing them hurt. That's all. It's more than that, Sarah said. Not everyone would have done what you did yesterday. Standing up to those kids, bringing Scout here, it shows a lot about who you are. Tyler felt a flicker of pride, but he also hesitated. I don't feel brave. Half the time, I'm scared I'll mess everything up. Sarah smiled gently. That's what bravery is, Tyler. Doing something even when you're scared. The words settled over him, their weight sinking in. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe being brave didn't mean being fearless. Maybe it meant stepping up even when fear tried to hold you back. Over the next few days, Tyler continued to visit Scout at the clinic. The dog's energy grew each day, and its playful personality began to shine. Scout loved chasing a tennis ball that Sarah had brought in, his clumsy antics drawing laughter from both Tyler and the clinic staff. One afternoon, as Tyler tossed the ball for Scout, Sarah approached with a clipboard in hand. I've got some good news, she said. A family is interested in adopting Scout. Tyler froze, the ball still in his hand. Already, Sarah nodded. They saw him at the fundraiser last week, and when I told them about his story, they wanted to meet him. Tyler looked down at Scout, who was wagging his tail expectantly. The thought of saying goodbye so soon made Tyler's chest tighten, but he knew this was what they had been working toward. When are they coming? Tyler asked quietly. Tomorrow, Sarah said. But I want you to know if you're not ready, we can take more time. There's no rush. Tyler shook his head. No, it's okay. I want to make sure it's the right family. Sarah smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. The next day, Tyler arrived early at the clinic. He wanted to spend as much time with Scout as possible before the family arrived. He played fetch with the dog in the back room, laughing as Scout skidded across the floor in his eagerness to retrieve the ball. When the family arrived, a middle-aged couple and their teenage daughter Scout greeted them with his usual enthusiasm. Tyler watched from the side as the daughter knelt to pet Scout, her laughter filling the room as the dog licked her hand. They seem nice, Tyler said to Sarah, his voice low. They are, Sarah agreed. And they've been through the adoption process before. They know what it takes. As the family interacted with Scout, Tyler felt a mix of emotions. He was happy for Scout, who clearly loved the attention, but a part of him couldn't shake the sadness of letting go. Before the family left, the daughter turned to Tyler. You're the one who rescued him, right? She asked. Tyler nodded, surprised by the question. Yeah. She smiled. Thanks for doing that. He's amazing. Tyler managed a small smile. He's special, he said. Take good care of him, okay? We will, the girl promised. That evening, as Tyler walked home, he felt the familiar ache of loss creeping in. But this time, it was accompanied by something else, a quiet sense of pride. He had done everything he could for Scout, just like he had for Lucky. And once again, he had made a difference. When he got home, Noah was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as Tyler approached, his expression curious. How'd it goes? Noah asked. Tyler sat down beside him, setting his backpack on the ground. Good. I think Scout's going to be happy with them. Noah nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. You're getting good at this, you know. Tyler frowned. At what? Helping, Noah said simply. Stepping up when it matters. Tyler didn't know how to respond, but his dad's words stayed with him long after they went inside. Maybe Noah was right. Maybe he was finding his place, one act of kindness at a time. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that carried the promise of change. Tyler woke with an unusual sense of calm. It wasn't that he wasn't sad about saying goodbye to Scout, but this time, the sadness didn't feel as heavy. He had seen how happy the dog had been with the family, and that made the farewell easier to bear. At breakfast, Noah joined him at the table, sipping coffee as he scanned the newspaper. Tyler sat quietly, stirring his cereal. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighed down by unspoken frustrations or grief. Any plans for today? Noah asked, glancing up. I thought I'd go by the clinic, Tyler replied. Sarah might need help with something. Noah nodded. You're spending a lot of time there these days. Yet Tyler said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I like it. Noah set down the paper, his expression thoughtful. You know, Ty, your mom used to say you had a way with animals. I think she'd be proud of what you're doing. Tyler looked up, startled by the rare mention of his mom. A lump formed in his throat, but he managed to nod. "Thanks, Dad." Noah gave him a small smile, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Before you go, I wanted to show you something." Tyler took the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a flyer for a local animal shelter, advertising a volunteer program for teens. Tyler's eyes widened as he read the details. "They're looking for people to help out," Noah said. "Figured it might be something you'd be interested in." Tyler stared at the flyer, his heart racing. "You'd be okay with me doing this?" "Why wouldn't I be?" Noah asked. "You've already shown you can handle the responsibility. Besides, it might be a good way for you to keep doing what you love." Tyler didn't know what to say. He looked at his dad, seeing the quiet pride in his expression, and felt a wave of gratitude. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. Noah shrugged, but there was a warmth in his eyes. "You're welcome. Just make sure you're still keeping up with school." Tyler laughed. "I will." Later that day, Tyler arrived at the clinic, the flyer tucked neatly into his backpack. Sarah was organizing supplies in the front room, and she looked up with a smile when she saw him. "Hey, Tyler. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," he said. Scout seemed really happy with that family. "I think they'll take good care of him." Sarah nodded, her expression warm. "I think so too. You did a great job, Tyler. He's lucky you found him." Tyler hesitated, then pulled the flyer from his bag and handed it to Sarah. "My dad showed me this today. It's a volunteer program at the shelter. Do you think I could do something like this?" Sarah studied the flyer, her smile widening. "Absolutely. You'd be perfect for it. And I'd be happy to give you a recommendation if you need one." "Really?" Tyler asked, his excitement growing. "Of course," Sarah said. "You've already proven how much you care about animals. This would be a great next step." Tyler felt a swell of pride and anticipation. The idea of working with more animals, of helping them the way he had helped Lucky and Scout, filled him with a sense of purpose. Over the next few weeks, Tyler began volunteering at the shelter, spending his afternoons cleaning kennels, feeding the animals, and helping with adoptions. The work was hard at times, but it was also deeply rewarding. Every wagging tail and grateful bark reminded him why he had started this journey. At school, things began to change too. Word of Tyler's work at the shelter spread, and though he still kept to himself most of the time, some of his classmates began treating him differently. Even Chris Barker seemed to back off, offering a curt nod in the hallway instead of his usual taunts. One afternoon, Tyler was walking home from the shelter when he saw Chris sitting on a bench near the park. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but something about Chris's slouched posture made him pause. "Hey," Tyler said, stopping a few feet away. Chris glanced up, his expression guarded. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Tyler said quickly. "Just you okay?" Chris shrugged, looking down at the ground. "Yeah, just bored, I guess." Tyler shifted awkwardly. "If you're bored, you could always come to the shelter. They're always looking for volunteers." Chris frowned, his brows furrowing. "Me? At a shelter?" "Why not?" Tyler said. "It's not that bad. And I think you'd be good at it." Chris snorted, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "I'll think about it." Tyler nodded, unsure if Chris meant it, but feeling good about extending the invitation. "Okay, let me know if you want to check it out." As he walked away, Tyler couldn't help but feel a small sense of accomplishment. Maybe people could change if they were given the chance. Back at home, Tyler sat on the porch with Noah, watching the sun set over the quiet street. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. "You're in a good mood," Noah said, glancing at his son. Tyler smiled. "Yeah, it's been a good day." Noah nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "You've come a long way, Ty. I know things haven't been easy, but I'm proud of you. Your mom would be too." Tyler swallowed the lump in his throat, his chest tightening with emotion. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Tyler felt a deep sense of peace. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The shelter bustled with activity as Tyler walked through the front doors one chilly afternoon. The sound of barking echoed down the narrow halls, mingling with the soft chatter of volunteers. Tyler adjusted his backpack and smiled at a few familiar faces before heading to the break room. He was beginning to feel at home here, and it was a good feeling. Today was a special day, a community adoption event. The shelter had organized it to find homes for as many animals as possible, turning the usually quiet building into a hub of excitement. Tyler had been looking forward to it all week, eager to see the animals he had cared for meet their new families. "Tyler," called Mrs. Jensen, the shelter's manager, as he entered the main room. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her clipboard was tucked under one arm. "Glad you're here. We could use your help in the puppy pen." "On it," Tyler replied, his grin widening. The puppy pen was his favorite place in the shelter, a fenced-off area filled with wiggling tails, playful yips, and boundless energy. When he arrived, he was greeted by a swarm of tiny paws and wet noses. One puppy, a scruffy black and white terrier mix, climbed into his lap immediately, wagging its tail so hard its entire body wobbled. "Hey there," Tyler said, laughing as the puppy licked his chin. "You ready to meet your new family?" As the afternoon went on, families filtered through the shelter, stopping to meet the animals and ask questions about adoption. Tyler stayed busy introducing puppies, answering questions, and making sure the animals stayed calm amidst the excitement. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride every time a family left with a new pet, knowing he had played a part in bringing them together. Later in the day, Tyler spotted a familiar face near the cat kennels. Chris Barker stood awkwardly by a row of cages, his hands stuffed in his pockets. His eyes darted around the room as if he wasn't sure what to do. Tyler hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hey, Chris," he said. "You made it." Chris turned, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Yeah, figured I'd check it out." Tyler nodded. "Cool. Need any help?" Chris shrugged, glancing at a small orange kitten curled up in one of the cages. "I don't know. My sister's been bugging me to get her a cat. Thought maybe I could find one here." Tyler smiled. "That one's a good choice," he said, gesturing to the kitten. "She's super friendly. Want to hold her?" Chris hesitated, but Tyler didn't wait for an answer. He opened the cage carefully and scooped up the kitten, placing her gently in Chris's arms. The kitten immediately began purring, nuzzling against Chris's chest. "See," Tyler said. "She likes you." Chris glanced down at the kitten, his tough exterior softening. "Yeah, she's kind of cool." By the time Chris left with the adoption paperwork in hand, Tyler couldn't hide his smile. It felt good to see someone like Chris finding a connection with an animal. Maybe this was a turning point for him, too. As the event wound down, Tyler helped clean up the puppy pen, sweeping stray bits of fur and wiping down the floors. His body ached from the day's work, but it was the kind of ache that came with satisfaction. "Hey, Tyler," Mrs. Jensen called from the door. "Can you come to the office for a minute?" Tyler set down the mop and followed her, curious. When they reached the small office at the back of the shelter, she handed him an envelope with his name written on the front. "What's this?" Tyler asked, frowning. "Open it," Mrs. Jensen said, smiling. Tyler tore the envelope carefully and pulled out a piece of paper. His eyes widened as he read the words, "Certificate of Outstanding Volunteer Service." Beneath it, a note was handwritten in neat cursive. "Tyler, thank you for your compassion and dedication. Your efforts have made a real difference in the lives of our animals. We're lucky to have you on our team, the Brooksville Animal Shelter staff." Tyler stared at the certificate, his heart swelling with pride. I don't know what to say." "You earned it," Mrs. Jensen said. "The work you've done here hasn't gone unnoticed. Keep it up and you'll go far." Tyler nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you." That evening, Tyler walked home with a spring in his step. The certificate was tucked safely in his backpack, but it wasn't just the recognition that made him feel good. It was the knowledge that he was part of something bigger, that his actions were creating ripples of kindness throughout the community. When he reached his house, Noah was on the porch, as usual. Tyler climbed the steps and pulled out the certificate, holding it up with a grin. "Look what they gave me," he said, handing it to his dad. Noah took the paper, his brow furrowing as he read the words. Then he smiled, handing it back. "Nice job, Ty. I'm proud of you." "Thanks," Tyler said, tucking the certificate back into his bag. He sat down beside his dad, the cool evening air wrapping around them. Feels good, doesn't it? Noah said after a moment, knowing you're making a difference. Yeah, Tyler agreed. It really does. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time in a long time, Tyler felt completely at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Tyler continued volunteering at the shelter, his confidence growing with every passing day. He made new friends among the staff and other volunteers, finding a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as he walked through the shelter, he paused by the corkboard near the entrance. It was covered in photos of adopted animals with their new families. His eyes landed on one picture in particular, a little girl holding Lucky, her smile as bright as the sun. Tyler couldn't help but grin. As he turned to leave, he whispered to himself, "We did good, buddy." Tyler knew his journey was just beginning, and whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them with kindness, courage, and the quiet determination to make the world a little brighter, one small act at a time. If this story inspired you, or if you believe in the power of small acts of kindness to change lives, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that button to follow along for more heartfelt stories that remind us all of the strength we find in compassion and community. Together, we can make the world a little brighter.